Thank you for tuning in today to I Retire for Him. You've tuned into I Retire for Him, a podcast dedicated to Christ followers all over the country seeking purpose in their retirement years. The facts are clear. Most Christians plan on retiring, but don't know what they're retiring to do. Let us be clear. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. If you're not dead, you're not done. When you retire, your calling doesn't retire with you. Your retirement years can be 30 years of purpose-driven, fully funded ministry, years of making impact in ways and places you never imagined. We're your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Check us out online at iretire4him.com. For the last 134 shows, we have shared the perspective of living out your faith in retirement from someone aged 83 and someone aged 58. Of course, 5 years ago when the show started, we were 53 and 78. Bruce Brangenberg has taken a sabbatical from the show to focus on caregiving for his wife, Judy, and my wife, Martha, jumps in here with me to continue this conversation of being purposeful in our retirement and not just looking at retirement as 30 years of vacation. Now, Martha and I are 58 years old. So what do two 58-year-olds have to lend to the conversation of retirement? We're not retired, so what do we know? Well, it's not really important that we know what the American dream of retirement is, because that's not the biblical perspective. As 58-year-olds heading into 59 and within 7 years of getting Medicare, we know that we need to be planning for our retirement, not just financially, but how and why and what God will be using us to do during those retirement years. As two 58-year-olds, we've lived in retirement villages for over 20 years already. We do have a lot of perspective to share, and we hope you enjoy the conversation today as a couple of 58-year-olds share their perspective on preparing for retirement. Martha, welcome back to the show. It's been 124 episodes that you've been on.
Did you go back and count?
We did the first 10 episodes together with Bruce and Judy.
Yes.
So it's been a long time.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for having me. And Jim, before we go into any conversation, I think we should clarify how in the world you're claiming that we've lived in retirement communities for 20 years and we're only 58. I think you need to explain.
So when we were 37, we moved to Florida. Actually, when we were 33, we bought our first place in Florida and a retirement community.
Not a restricted retirement community, but everybody there was pretty much
retired.
Everybody
was retired, but us.
Yes.
And so we learned what living with a bunch of retirees in Florida was all about, because everybody moves to Florida, Arizona, or Texas for what it used to be California, Florida, Arizona, and Texas. Now it's Florida, Arizona, sometimes Texas and Florida.
And a few other places.
But mostly warm south places. Well, we moved into one of those places, not having any idea that retired people, we learned a lot of things about retirement, but that's it. So then we lived on the beaches just south of Clearwater, Florida for almost 20 years, and then spent 3 years in Fort Myers, Florida, again in another retirement community. It wasn't restricted retirement community, but it was a retirement community nonetheless.
Which is pretty typical in Florida. So I just thought it was important to clarify, because we weren't in like a 55 plus deed restricted, and yet we were only in our 30s.
Yet those 55 plus deed restricted, just so you know, if you're under 55, 10% of the population can be under 55.
It's a little known secret.
I found that out because I was looking at it in case we could move into a 55 plus neighborhood, but we never did. And I'm glad it was.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. I just thought that was really important.
Well, then why don't you clarify where I Retire for Him came from?
Well, it's a pretty neat story. We were very early in the stages of I work for him as young entrepreneurs that learned that our workplace is our place of ministry. We were having a conversation with my dad, and he said, specifically to you, Jim, I get that I work for him. I understand it, but I'm retired. I retire for him. That was my paraphrase. But that's essentially was the aha moment that in different phases of life, we're still doing life for him, capital H, meaning for the Lord. And what does that look like? And so through the lens of my dad and my mom's life, we started having this conversation about, well, what does it look like in retirement to live for him and retire for him? And where does that fit into this lens that Americans specifically have about this endless vacation that happens after you're done working and earning an income.
So we spent a lot of time studying where did this whole idea of retirement come from. So it really happened when Social Security was set up in the United States, which was designed to kick in at 65 when the average life expectancy was 63. So they never really intended for people to live that long and collect Social Security. Well, then medical technology and the medical world just exploded and came up with a lot of ways to help people live longer. And now people are living 70, 80, 90, 100 years. And according to the latest Social Security census, over 350 years. It's
How did I know you were going to bring that?
You had to. Over 20 million people in our country over 100 years old.
Believe it or not.
I believe it or not. That'd be Ripley's Believe It or Not. That's right. All right. But what we have seen is that nobody was ever really prepared. Social Security was supposed to help us financially for retirement, but nobody ever helped people prepare for what they're going to do in retirement. And as Bruce and I have talked about the last 134 episodes, everybody knows what they're retiring from. I just can't wait to get out of my job. I'm tired of work and blah, 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 blah. But very few people know what they're retiring to. And so a lot of people go, well, what does the Bible have to say about retirement? One verse, depending on your translation, mentions the word retirement. You know why? Because it's not biblical to just check out and go on a 30-year vacation. The only reference in the Bible is in the book of Leviticus, and it's about the Levites. And it's about how, I might be wrong, it might be Deuteronomy. I should have gone and figured it out.
Just say Old Testament.
Old Testament in the laws. And what God was saying is that the Levites were to work from 25 to 50. And in that period of time, they were butchers, they were tanners, they were skinners. They prepared the sacrifices for the priests to offer them up on the altars. But they were doing the heavy lifting, 25 to 50.
They were the slaughterhouse.
They were the slaughterhouse,
basically. It was intense manual labor.
Butchers, for sure. But they were doing so much more, butchers and tanners. And then at age 50, they were to retire. But they weren't done. They were then supposed to start training in the younger kids on what to do next.
Right.
So really, they went from working hard labor to being mentors and disciplers. That's what the Bible has to say about retirement. If you'll notice, it never mentions that Moses retired at 65 and enjoyed a luscious time in the Egyptian kingdom. No, he didn't get his first real job till he was 80 years old. We just don't hear that. Most of the kings in the Old Testament didn't live past 70, so they would have only gotten 5 years of Social Security. So what we know biblically is that it's not biblical to just stop working. God designed us to work. God gave us work in the garden to keep us out of trouble. How did that work for us?
What's interesting, Jim, is that it really, in America, we've designed the system, the financial system, in such a way that if we save enough money and invest it in the systems we have here in place in America, that then we can not, quote unquote, punch a time clock. But that's where this conversation really is headed, is that, okay, so if we have the ability to not punch a time clock, we have the ability to be supported financially through planning, through preparation, then what are we doing with our time once we no longer have that daily responsibility? And I think that it's such an interesting conversation because we are so programmed by our culture to believe the American dream somehow is scriptural. And what you just said is there's one verse.
The American dream of retirement.
Sorry. Well, there's a lot we could say about the American dream in general, but you're right.
That's not the topic of today's show.
The long-term American dream of retirement, of do all these things so that you can, whatever that is, fill in the blank for yourself. If your dream is to be somewhere tropical and to, enjoy the breeze on the golf course every day, that's what you're thinking.
So you can deal with skin cancer when you're 90, like my dad.
Yes.
That's right. All right. So our perspective on retirement, it's not happening. We don't plan on retirement. Martha and I have we're 58. We'll be 59 this year. We have a 25-year plan. Both of our sets of our parents ran pretty hard to their mid-80s. So our goal is to run pretty hard for the Lord till our mid-80s.
Can I just interject, though?
Well, of course you can. You've already have.
Okay. This is the way it goes with Jim and Martha. So one of the things I think that's interesting is even just using that word. You're saying we don't plan on retiring. Well, there may be a point in time where we no longer earn a paycheck, but that is what most people are thinking of when you say we don't plan on retiring. But the fact is,
we already don't punch a clock. We work all the time, whether it's on I Work for Him or doing construction or doing other ministry stuff. We already don't punch a clock. So,
right. But even to the danger of saying we don't plan on retiring, that doesn't mean that I am going to earn a paycheck every week for the rest of 30 years, but it's the whole idea of not hanging up our hats.
I was planning on you earning that check so that I could go out, so I could learn how to fish, and I could go fishing every day.
Oh, yeah, right.
After I buy a boat.
So anybody who's watched this for any period of time probably has figured out that that's not going to be this case.
Now, I would like to learn how to fish. If there's anybody out there that would like to take me fishing and teach me how to fish, I would really like that.
And he'll really try to be quiet. Right?
I will.
If it's required.
Yeah, it's really hard to be quiet.
Maybe that's why you
don't
go fishing.
We've got a couple of different branches of our daily work.
Yes.
I work for him and I retire for him. Those are two of the things that we work on all day long. What do they have to do with each other? It has to do with putting our faith first and letting our faith impact everything we do. Whatever stage in life we're at, whether we're in the work stage, the kid raises stage, the kids out of the house stage, still working, or whether we're done punching the clock, but we're still working, but today we're a fully funded missionary by Social Security. But that's what we have conversations about. We release a weekly podcast called I Work for Him that we have been doing for 12 years with thousands of episodes. I Retire for Him came along a little bit later, and we release these podcasts every other week. But what do they have to do with it? It just has to do with living intentionally with our faith.
Yeah, I think it's just important because, you started the show with what did a couple 58-year-olds know about retirement? Well, number one, we've surrounded ourselves with people that are in all stages of life, and we have observed, we interact, we pay attention to what they're dealing with. And as we are still in the income earning stage of life and the responsibility of producing things as a part of our work, that's where I Work for Him really helps the 58-year-old. But we just have learned a lot by the people that as you say, Jim, are chronologically superior to us, that have walked ahead of us in life. And we love to have those conversations and to stir this up and think, what is the biblical approach to this stage of life? And this podcast available on all your podcast platforms on the audio side, but also available on YouTube, also available on Rumble, also available, out there on Facebook. We post this on Facebook. So lots of different ways to capture this podcast. We encourage you, let your friends know about this. We've got a huge vault of past episodes that really talk about very practical things. And as we take this forward, we're going to continue to hear stories of people sharing their faith. But speaking of stories, Martha, you and I back in 2020, God told us to write not just one, not just two, but 3 books. We gave birth to book triplets. One of those books was to this audience called I Retire for Him. Its chapters and stories help the reader walk through preparing spiritually for the stage of life we called retirement from a biblical perspective. We'd love for you, our listeners, to get a copy of this. You can get it on Amazon or you can get it on our website. Just make a donation of $10 or more on our website and we'll send you a copy. We will sign it as well. But you need to put a message in the memo of the donation so we know you want a copy of the book. We'd love to get it in your hands. We know that you will really enjoy it. If you're on any of our video platforms, you'll see that Martha's holding up the book, just like Vanna White would if Vanna were I'll do
on
the little
show.
hand sweep right there.
Speaking of Vanna, has she retired yet?
I think so.
Okay.
They both
Vanna
retired.
and Pat.
They
Wow.
both retired at the same time.
Wow.
Because you really couldn't do one without the other.
You know what it was? They ran out of new dresses. Vanna White wore a different dress every day for 40 years. They ran out of new dresses.
I don't know about that.
New dress. Did she ever wear the same dress twice? I think the answer is no. Did you care? Maybe not. All right. So what did we learn from our parents about retirement? Or let's start with grandparents. So all of my grandparents were gone before I was out of elementary school, except for one. And one grandparent lived till we were in our 30s. And my grandmother, I called her Nana. She loved life, and she was always out being with people. always out being with people. She loved to dance. In fact, that's how she met her husband. And then anyway, she had 4 husbands because she outlived 4 guys. But she just loved life. She had a lot of fun. She never went to college. I don't know that she ever had a job outside of high school.
I think, though, Jim, I remember stories of her being somewhat entrepreneurial because I've heard that she would sell her cake. She would make a sponge cake and sell it to people.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
Yes. So I
don't
think
believe
that
she ever made me one of those sponge cakes.
she might have been done baking.
Maybe.
And you didn't know to ask her about it.
From my grandparents, I didn't learn a lot from them because they died very, very young, except for my one that lived to be 90. And she just she loved life, lived with my aunt alongside her. But Martha, your grandparents, your dad's folks lived to be in their late 80s. We learned a lot about retirement from them.
I think in hindsight, we really did, Jim. Just watching them do life and the way that they gave to other people, they were not sedentary. My grandfather was a fixer, and he didn't always fix things.
Clips, Velcro,
the
duct
way
tape kind of fixing.
Yeah, he wasn't necessarily making it up to manufacturer standards, but he was making things work again that might be broken. And he helped a lot of people through accounting because that was his career. And so really he did what we talk a lot about is the idea of all of the skills and experience you had in your career, how can you use it in your retirement? And when I was a little kid, I did not understand this as a little kid, but I remember it happening Sundays after church. We went to my grandparents. We all had dinner together. And then apparently my grandfather and my dad disappeared while we were all playing around. Well, what they were doing was my grandfather was helping my dad with his books for his company. I didn't know that, but that was something he was helping for my dad's business to grow and to flourish. He was using his accounting skills to help my dad with his work.
And later on in life, your dad was really good at keeping his own books. It was incredible. We lived for 20 years we owned houses for 20 years in retirement, quote unquote, villages, 21 years actually. What did we learn? We learned, I'm going to give you Jim's list, Martha can give you her list. What I learned is that retired people that have no purpose in their daily life, except for to walk on the beach or play tennis, can sometimes be unhappy. And sometimes they can be meddlesome because they have nothing to do, and so they meddle. That the retired people that had purpose, things to do, they were happy. They had a place to feed their soul by feeding other people or by serving other people. I mean, what we learned is that if you just plan on retiring and being on vacation, after about a year or two, it's not going to be pretty.
What do you mean by that? Not going to be pretty. What does that mean?
Well, we saw a lot of people they retired and they died because they didn't have any purpose. Or they just got miserable because they were tired of doing the same things. I mean, people are pretty unusual. My dad golfed for 20 straight years after he retired. He never got tired of golfing. I don't know how that's possible. Now he regrets it because he's almost 92 and he's got skin cancer all his face. But, that was part of the problem of golfing in Tucson for all those years. But most people who just have no purpose every day, they just get kind of ornery.
Don't you think that...
Or sad. Maybe it's just sad and it comes out like ordinariness.
Well, and don't you think that a lot of people, I think all of us in life, when we're in a routine that becomes very mundane, we may not even realize that we're not very fun to be around anymore.
And lonely. That was something we saw.
That was another thing. Yep.
We saw, and that, because when we us young people moved into the neighborhood full of chronologically superior folks who are mostly retired, we noticed that they loved hanging out with us because they were lonely for their own kids. That's what's so funny. In this country, we say, hey, when you retire, sell your house, go move to the South where it's warm and beautiful every day. But the worst part about that is you're leaving your family, you're leaving your friends, and people were lonely because all they got to see with their kids was 1 week a year when their kids went on vacation. And not every year did their kids want to come spend their vacation in the exact same spot again.
Well, no, and so it was kind of fun because our kids didn't realize how many adopted kind of grandparents they had in their lives because our neighbors loved watching them play and listening to them have fun, in the pool and things like that, because they miss seeing that energy of a younger generation. So learning where people are at and observing them and seeing, that's just something that we learn just by meeting people and talking to them, is that they ultimately were lonely, or they had just gotten tired of what they were doing in their day-to-day life. And they don't even realize it because they thought they're living the American dream of retirement.
And they were. When we lived in Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, they were living that dream. They lived 100 yards from the beach, and they were getting seashells. They got to watch sunsets on the beach. And it was all great, except for the nightmare that came when the hurricanes came. And then the insurance rates went up.
We don't want to make this
and then
we're
not going to go into this deep dive today, but have I told you that homeowners associations in Florida are purgatory on earth?
Now, they can be wonderful because we met a lot of wonderful friends through those
We did,
HOAs.
but the people that were running the homeowners association were some of those miserable people that wanted purpose in their life. Moving on.
Okay, moving on, because there's so much potential there for what people can do. But, one of the things we believe in being good stewards of our resources. And it really becomes incredibly critical in your life when you get to this point where you're on a fixed income from here on out when we're talking about financial retirement. Patriot Mobile is a cellular company with values that align with yours and mine. And their customer service is based in America, and they allow you to have a service on any of the 3 major carrier towers. It's like a perfect marriage of all the things that you need and want from a cellular company. So go to patriotmobile.com/I work for him. And don't worry, I will put that in the show notes for you. And you can make the switch and support I Retire for him at the same time.
We made the switch. It's been awesome.
It really has.
All right, so are we attacking retirement? No, we know that you can't, keep... the Bible was clear. At age 50, you start to slow down. You can't sling animals up onto the altar anymore, okay? But we're obviously, those of you that are 50 or and up listening, at 65, you can still do a lot of amazing things. At 75, you can still do a lot of amazing things. We're not attacking retirement. We know that there's one day you're going to stop collecting a paycheck. But what we're kind of attacking is the American dream in retirement, because I don't believe it's biblical.
Well, and Jim, and I think in our culture, people think when you challenge an idea, they think you're attacking it. And what we're saying is let's challenge this idea that we've all adopted without even realizing it, because it's just the social norm, and saying what really is retirement about. So no, we're not attacking it, but we want to open up the Bible. We want to open up our willingness to think of things differently and say, what really is that season of life supposed to look like for you, for me, for us as a couple, for our friends, our listeners, for all of you that are out there listening? What is it supposed to look like, and what kinds of changes can we make to get a little bit closer to that goal?
In future episodes, we'll talk about how we're planning on spending our retirement years. So we'll refer them that way, because 65 plus. But right now, Martha and I have been preparing for that. Are we saving money? No, we're spending it. Right now, we're rehabbing a couple of old buildings in our cute little town of Marionville, Missouri. And those are places we plan on doing ministry. One's going to be a little coffee shop, a gathering place here in town, where we're going to spend time getting to know our neighbors and spending time ministering to people. I'm also the chaplain of the fire department. I'm trying to convince Martha to be a chaplain of the fire department too, because there's women that call 911 just like men do. So we're looking to be proactive in preparing ourselves for those years when we can't be as active in doing rehab of 150-year-old buildings.
Good point. So,
Okay. Wow. All right.
I'm not sure what I even have to add to that, other than, I just wanted to say we were having a conversation earlier today with somebody who's newly retired. And I think that
10 days ago?
Yeah, really newly retired. And I think what a lot of people, what I see in retirement is that you have the opportunity to choose for the first time in a very long time how you spend each day.
Right.
And as a steward of all that God has given you, you have to choose wisely. And sometimes that means taking a chill day, reading your favorite book, doing puzzles, whatever it is that you enjoy that gives you peace. But every day, stewarding the time that God has given you and the energy that He's given you and the wisdom that He's given you. And we look forward to hearing how God churns in people to make those decisions and how you steward your time.
Yeah, and we have to choose between the good and the great. God's got great things for you. Don't settle for the good things that people are putting in front of you. And you don't have to fill every waking moment, because you need to leave moments for the unpredictable, for the unexpected visits or the unexpected interruptions in your day that aren't interruptions, they're planned intersections of your life.
There you go.
Jesus was always busy, but never in a hurry. We need to make sure that we focus that. And so maybe you're listening today and you've got an I retire for him story. You've got a story of how you're living out your faith in your retirement. Well, we'd like to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. Martha, how can they contact us?
You know, the easiest way is if you go to, I'll put the website link in the show notes, but go there and we'll have a little contact form.
But if they're listening on the podcast, and then this won't necessarily take time to look at the show notes.
Okay, iretireforhim.com. That's iretire, the number 4, him.com. There you'll find a contact us, and there you can send us a message. That is the simplest way to do it.
Or you can dial our 800 number, which is 866
713.
It's been so long.
I'm going to have to put it in the notes too. 9675.
That's right. Wow. Sorry. Totally
That's okay. You were going off of the cuff there.
All right. So in the future podcasts, we're looking for people to share their stories of living out their faith in their retirement. We'll also be interviewing some authors that maybe have written some books about this. Ministry leaders that are leading ministries, encouraging and equipping retired or chronologically superior folks to be purposeful in those retirement years. And again, from our hearts, more practical and tactical, factual and biblical wisdom and knowledge on how you can live out your faith in your retirement years. Something you can take away from every show. But we're asking for you to let your friends know about this show.
Yeah, so we, again, just share this podcast. If you get our newsletter, we have the link right in the email that you get. And everybody that I know that is retired is very good
at sharing things,
forwarding emails.
Certainly jokes, for sure.
So, yes. So consider this one of those things you want to share with your friends. We would love to get the word out there about the biblical conversation of retirement.
You've been listening to I Retire for Him with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. We're Christ followers planning our retirement journey so we can say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you, encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. So you can say, I retire for Him.